A silent city lies hidden beneath the Amazon canopy. For centuries, the story we told ourselves was simple. The Amazon before European contact was a pristine, untouched wilderness, home only to small, scattered tribes living in harmony with an untamed jungle. This was the empty forest, a counterfeit paradise that could not support civilization. But that story is wrong. By the end of this exploration, you will understand how a technological breakthrough has revealed a lost world, forcing us to rewrite the history of the Americas. What archaeologists are now finding beneath the trees are not just villages, but vast geometric earthworks, complex mound settlements, and evidence of millions of people. These hidden structures are a previous estimate of pre-Columbian populations and demand a radical new view of social complexity and environmental mastery in the ancient Amazon. The key to this discovery was a laser from the sky, a technology that peeled back the green veil to show us what was always there. How did an entire civilization of engineers and farmers vanish so completely that we forgot they ever existed? This belief was not just a story, it was a scientific doctrine. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing view among scholars was that the Amazon was a counterfeit paradise. On the surface, it looked lush and fertile, a place of impossible abundance, but the reality, experts argued, was tragically thin. The region's soils were famously poor, leached of nutrients by constant rain and heat. In this model, the land could not support the agriculture needed for cities or kingdoms. It could only sustain small, mobile groups of hunter-gatherers, living lightly on the land and moving frequently. This was the empty wilderness hypothesis, and it painted a picture of isolation. Estimates based on this idea suggested the entire basin might have been home to only 1 or 2 million people at its peak, scattered like seeds across a continent-sized garden. This framework did more than fill textbooks, it shaped reality. It influenced conservation policies, land rights debates, and the very way we imagined human potential in the tropics. It created a powerful, seemingly logical narrative that the grandeur of the Amazon was purely natural, and that humans had always been bit players in its ancient story. That narrative, however, was built on a single critical assumption that what we saw on the surface was all there ever was. But the jungle itself began to whisper a different story. Long before the lasers, there were hints, scattered pieces of a puzzle that did not fit the empty forest picture. The first clues emerged not from high technology, but from the ground itself, often by pure chance. In the state of Acre in western Brazil, the clearing of land for cattle ranching in the 1970s and 80s began to reveal something astonishing. From the air, pilots and ranchers started to notice vast geometric shapes etched into the earth. These were the geoglyphs, enormous circles, squares, and octagons formed by deep ditches and tall earthen banks. On the ground, they were subtle, but from above their precision was undeniable. They were not villages, they seemed ceremonial or social in nature, and they numbered in the hundreds. For archaeologists, these were stunning, but they presented a mystery. Were they just isolated ritual centers built by a small group in one specific region? The prevailing theory still held strong, viewing them as fascinating outliers. Meanwhile, in the Bolivian Amazon, a different kind of discovery was taking shape. Researchers and farmers encountered massive, raised agricultural fields. Known as camelones, these were long, elevated platforms of earth surrounded by canals. They were not just simple garden plots, they were a sophisticated answer to the Amazon's challenges. The canals managed water, preventing floods in the rainy season and storing it for the dry season. The raised soil was enriched with compost and likely aquatic plants from the canals, creating fertile, sustainable plots in the middle of what was supposed to be barren land. Here was clear evidence of large-scale, intensive farming, the very kind of activity the empty forest hypothesis said was impossible. Yet again, these wonders were often explained away as brilliant but localized adaptations. Each discovery was treated as an exception, a curious anomaly in the vast, empty green. The problem was one of perspective. Standing in the forest, you might find one ditch or one mound. You could not see the pattern, you could not comprehend the scale. The true secret of the Amazon was not just what was built, but how completely it had been hidden, waiting for a tool that could see the forest for the trees. The missing tool arrived not from the realm of archaeology, but from the world of physics and engineering. It is called Lidar, a word that stands for light detection and ranging, and its application in the Amazon has been nothing short of revolutionary. Picture a specialized aircraft flying a precise grid pattern over the dense jungle, its instrument firing hundreds of thousands of laser pulses toward the Earth every single second. Each pulse is a tiny photon of light racing down through the leaves and branches. Most hit the canopy, but a lucky few find their way through gaps in the foliage, striking the ground itself and bouncing back to a sensor on the plane. By measuring the precise time it takes for each pulse to return, a powerful computer can build an astonishingly detailed three-dimensional map of the surface below, digitally stripping away every single tree, vine, and bush to reveal the bare earth. For the first time, researchers could see the forest floor as if the jungle had simply vanished. What appeared from the ground to be a single, isolated mound suddenly became part of a vast, interconnected complex. What looked like a random hillock was revealed as a perfectly aligned plaza. Lidar did not just find new sites, it transformed how we understand the ones we already knew. It allowed archaeologists to survey hundreds of square kilometers in the time it would take a ground team to meticulously map a single hectare. This shift in scale changed the very questions being asked. The focus moved from studying individual sites, like finding a single brick from a cathedral, to analyzing entire ancient landscapes, seeing the full blueprint of a forgotten civilization. The hidden world beneath the canopy was no longer a collection of mysterious dots. It was a coherent, sprawling map of human ambition, now waiting to be read. The Lidar maps of Acre delivered the first undeniable proof of a patterned landscape. Where cattle ranchers had stumbled upon a few strange shapes, the airborne lasers now revealed a sprawling, hidden geometry. Across thousands of square kilometers, the forest floor was etched with precise earthworks, not by the dozens but by the hundreds. They appeared as vast circles, perfect squares, and complex octagons, each formed by deep ditches and tall earthen banks that stood several meters high. Their scale is humbling, with some enclosures large enough to contain multiple soccer fields, but more stunning than any single structure is their sheer density. The Lidar surveys showed these geoglyphs were not rare monuments. They were a common feature of the ancient landscape, sometimes spaced only a few kilometers apart. This was not a scattering of isolated ritual sites. It was a networked tapestry of human design. The precision of their layouts, with straight ditches running for hundreds of meters and angles aligning with celestial events, speaks of sophisticated knowledge, of surveyors and engineers who transformed the land according to a plan. Their exact purpose remains a topic of lively debate. Were they ceremonial centers for gatherings and rituals? Could they have served as defensive enclosures or as social spaces defining community identity? The absence of permanent dwellings inside many of them suggests they were not towns, but rather specialized spaces built for a purpose that unified people across a wide region. Whatever their primary function, their existence alone sends a clear message. Building just one of these earthworks would have required the organized labor of many people, working together to move immense volumes of soil without the use of metal tools or draft animals. The fact that there are hundreds of them built over centuries indicates a sustained, large-scale society capable of mobilizing labor, managing resources, and imprinting its vision upon the very earth. This was not a wilderness dotted with small bands. It was a managed, engineered environment. The geoglyphs of Acre were the first major crack in the old story, proving that the western Amazon was home to something far more complex than anyone had dared to propose. Yet the geometric earthworks were only one part of this hidden blueprint. As Lidar surveys expanded further south into regions like the upper Tapajos Basin, it revealed an entirely different kind of ancient landscape, one built not for ceremony alone, but for daily life. Here, the laser maps uncovered vast, intricate settlements, complex villages engineered with a clear vision of community and defense. The layout is strikingly organized. At the heart of these sites, researchers found central plazas, large open spaces that likely served as the social and ceremonial core of the community. Radiating from these plazas were clusters of residential mounds, artificial hills built up to raise homes above the seasonal floods and to mark family spaces. These mounds were not scattered randomly. They were arranged in rings or specific patterns around the central plaza, suggesting a planned settlement with a sense of order and possibly social structure. Surrounding the entire community, archaeologists identified deep, defensive ditches and earthen embankments, clear indications that these were not just open villages, but fortified towns conscious of protection. Most remarkably, connecting these clusters of mounds to each other and to the central plaza were sunken roads, pathways dug lower than the surrounding ground, creating defined thoroughfares that linked the community together. This is the architecture of a settled, agricultural society. The scale of earth-moving required to build these mound complexes, their clear defensive works, and their organized internal layout all point to a large, permanent population. These were not nomadic hunter-gatherers following game. They were farmers, engineers, and citizens living in towns that required cooperation, leadership, and a deep connection to their land. The very existence of these mound villages dismantles the old stereotype completely. Here was evidence of people investing immense labor not for a single ritual, but to create a lasting home, generation after generation, in the heart of the Amazon. But a civilization of millions cannot be built on ceremony and architecture alone. It requires a foundation, a steady, reliable source of food. This presents the central paradox of the ancient Amazon. How could such large, settled populations farm intensively on soils famously poor and fragile? The answer lies not in the sky or the trees, but beneath our feet, in a miraculous, human-made substance known as Terra Preta do Indio, the black earth of the Indians. This is not ordinary jungle soil. It is a dark, rich, incredibly fertile earth that stands in stark contrast to the thin, yellowish clay typical of the region. For over a century, scientists and farmers have recognized its power, but only recently have we begun to understand it as perhaps the greatest agricultural innovation of the ancient Americas. Terra Preta is not a natural accident. It is a manufactured product, the result of centuries of deliberate, intelligent waste management by indigenous communities. They created it through a meticulous process of adding charcoal from cooking fires, broken pottery, composted food waste, fish bones, and animal manure to the ground. This was not casual dumping, it was a systematic soil enrichment strategy. The charcoal, in particular, is the secret ingredient. It creates a porous structure that retains nutrients and moisture, and it hosts a thriving microbiome that keeps the soil alive and productive for astonishing lengths of time. Unlike modern fertilizers that wash away, these dark earths are regenerative. They can sustain intensive, continuous cultivation for decades, even centuries, without exhaustion. This discovery changes everything. The geometric earthworks and mound villages were not isolated marvels. they were the visible hubs of a thriving society. The Terra Preta patches often found nearby were the invisible engine, the gardens and farmlands that fed the builders, the engineers, and the families. This was a circular economy of sustainability, where waste was transformed into wealth and where human activity did not degrade the land, but actively improved it for future generations. The presence of this profound agricultural technology proves these societies were not just surviving in the Amazon, they were mastering it, cultivating a permanent food base that could support the very scale of life that the Lidar maps are now revealing to us. The true revelation lies not in the isolated sites, but in the forest itself. When you step back from the individual geoglyph or village mound, a breathtaking new picture comes into focus. What we are looking at is not a wilderness dotted with human settlements, but a single, vast, human-shaped ecosystem. An increasing number of ecologists and archaeologists now propose a radical idea that much of the Amazon as we know it today is an anthropogenic landscape, a garden forest cultivated over thousands of years. This is not a metaphor. The evidence is written into the very composition of the jungle. Take a walk through certain parts of the forest, and you might notice something unusual. Certain valuable tree species, like the towering Brazil nut or various useful palms, appear in oddly concentrated groves, standing in patterns that do not follow natural dispersal. These are not wild stands, they are living orchards, deliberately planted and tended by ancient communities to provide reliable food, fiber, and materials. The forest floor itself holds clues. Those widespread patches of fertile terra preta are not just garden plots, they are the hubs of a sophisticated agroforestry system. Around these enriched soils, people would have cultivated a layered garden of useful plants, from fruit trees and medicinal herbs to root crops, creating a biodiverse food forest that mimicked the jungle's own structure but was tailored for human use. This practice transformed the land into a productive mosaic. Even the earthworks served a broader land management purpose. The ditches and banks we see from the air likely help to manage water drainage, define territories, and perhaps even create micro-environments for different crops. The entire region becomes a managed estate, a sprawling, productive landscape engineered for sustainability. This concept of a biochar landscape, built on the foundation of terra preta, changes our understanding of carrying capacity entirely. A simple field of corn depletes the soil, but a managed food forest, enriched with permanent dark earth, actually builds fertility over time. It could support far more people per square kilometer than traditional models of slash and burn agriculture ever allowed. This means the ancient Amazonians were not passive inhabitants of a green world. They were its active architects, cultivating a paradise that could feed millions. The jungle we see today in many areas is not a primeval relic. It is the enduring legacy of their gardening, a testament to a civilization that did not conquer nature, but partnered with it to create something enduring. This fundamental rethinking of the Amazon forces us to ask a new and monumental question. If this was not an empty wilderness, but a cultivated, engineered landscape, just how many people called it home? For decades, the answer was constrained by a simple mathematical assumption. Researchers would look at the thin, acidic soils of the untouched jungle and calculate how many hunter-gatherers that land could support before it was exhausted. The result was a low ceiling, a theoretical carrying capacity that seemed to cap the entire basin's population at perhaps 1 or 2 million souls, scattered thinly across an area the size of the continental United States. This number felt logical, but it was built on a critical flaw. It assumed the ancient inhabitants were merely taking from a static, natural environment, rather than actively improving and transforming it. The math was correct, but it was solving the wrong equation entirely. The new equation begins with the very ground we now understand. To estimate population, you must first estimate food. And the discovery of Terra Preta changes that calculation completely. Each patch of this dark, fertile earth represents not just a garden, but a permanent, high-yield agricultural hub. Researchers can now map the distribution and total area of these anthropogenic soils across the basin. When you model how many people a hectare of enriched, continuously productive Terra Preta could support compared to a hectare of typical forest used for sporadic foraging, the numbers diverge dramatically. The food base was not scarce, it was abundant and engineered for reliability. This provides the foundation, the caloric engine for a large society. Next, you add the evidence of labor. The geometric earthworks and mound complexes are not just artifacts, they are demographic signatures. Archaeologists use the scale of these constructions to estimate the size of the workforce required to build them. Moving thousands of cubic meters of earth with simple tools is not the work of a tiny, isolated village. It is a community-wide endeavor. The sheer density of these sites, now visible thanks to Lidar, suggests this organized labor was not a rare event, but a recurring feature of life across vast regions. When you map hundreds of such sites, each requiring hundreds or thousands of person-days of work, you begin to glimpse the size of the population pool from which that labor was drawn. Finally, you consider the landscape itself. The managed forests with their concentrations of fruit and nut trees represent another form of cultivated abundance. This agroforestry system provided a steady, diverse supply of food and materials, supplementing the staple crops grown in the Terra Preta gardens. This mosaic of resources means the land could support more people in a smaller area, not as hunter-gatherers requiring vast territories, but as settled farmers and forest managers living in closer communities. When you feed these new variables into the models, the old population ceiling shatters. Revised estimates from leading researchers now suggest that the Amazon basin was likely home to 8 to 10 million people before European contact. In some particularly developed regions, like the area around the mouth of the Tapajos River, local population densities may have rivaled those of ancient European societies. We are no longer talking about scattered tribes, but a network of interconnected societies totaling millions of individuals. This is not a minor adjustment, it is a complete recalibration of history. The Amazon was not a silent, empty stage, but a bustling, vibrant continent of its own, humming with the activity of countless communities. And this revelation makes the next part of the story all the more profound, for if millions were here, what happened to make us forget they ever existed? This immense population was not a single, uniform empire. The Lidar maps and ground surveys reveal something even more fascinating, a vast cultural mosaic. Across the Amazon basin, different societies developed unique ways of life, adapting ingeniously to their specific environments. There was no central capital, no singular ruler commanding the entire jungle. Instead, we see a tapestry of diverse cultures, each leaving its own distinct fingerprint upon the land. In the southwest, in places like Acre, we find the enigmatic geoglyph builders. Their legacy is one of geometry and precision, creating vast ceremonial enclosures that speak to a shared social or spiritual vision across a wide region. Their settlements appear less dense, suggesting a society perhaps more dispersed, connected through these monumental gathering places. Travel southeast to the upper Tapajos, and the pattern shifts dramatically. Here, the Mound village societies thrived. Their signature is the fortified town with central plazas, ringed residential mounds, and sunken roads. This was a world of settled, agricultural communities living in clearly defined, protected spaces, their architecture reflecting a deep concern for community structure and defense. Along the mighty mainstream of the Amazon River itself, a different model emerged, one of powerful riverine chiefdoms. These societies leveraged the incredible highway of the river, controlling trade networks that moved goods, ideas, and people across thousands of kilometers. Their centers were often built on natural bluffs or artificially raised ground near the riverbanks, commanding both the water and the surrounding landscape. Their power was likely based on control of resources and commerce, creating hierarchies more pronounced than in the interior regions. And at the very mouth of the river, on the island of Morojo, flourished the remarkable Marajora culture. These were master mound builders on a staggering scale, constructing enormous ceremonial platforms and residential mounds that could house thousands. Their elaborate, painted pottery suggests a complex society with rich artistic and symbolic traditions. What unites these varied peoples is not a common political structure, but a shared technological and ecological wisdom. They all practiced forms of landscape engineering, from building earthworks to creating Terra Preta. They all mastered the art of living sustainably within the Amazon's challenges. The true scale of pre-Columbian life was not the scale of an empire, but the collective scale of countless innovative societies, a continent of solutions flowering independently yet connected by the great green web of the forest itself. The timeline of this lost world is as crucial as its scale. When exactly did these societies rise to transform the Amazon? The answer comes not from legends, but from the silent decay of ancient materials, measured by the steady tick of atomic clocks. Radiocarbon dating, a technique that measures the remaining radioactive carbon in organic samples like charcoal or seeds, has provided a clear, if startling, chronology. The results tell a story of a remarkably recent and rapid cultural fluorescence. While some early earthworks and signs of landscape management date back over 2,000 years, the great pulse of construction, the era when the geometric enclosures and vast mound villages rose across the basin, occurred primarily between the years 1250 and 1500 of the Common Era. Think about that for a moment. This means that at the very moment Gothic cathedrals were reaching for the sky in Europe, and while the Inca were consolidating their empire in the Andes, the societies of the Amazon were engaged in their own monumental project, engineering their continent on a staggering scale. Their cultural peak was not in some distant mythical past. It was immediate, vibrant, and in full swing. This timeline forces a profound and haunting realization. The apex of this Amazonian civilization coincided almost precisely with the eve of European arrival in the Americas. These complex societies, with their managed forests and fertile dark earths, were likely at their most populous and interconnected just as ships first appeared on the horizon. They were not relics of a bygone age, they were contemporary powers, a living, breathing world. This makes what followed not a slow decline lost to time, but a sudden, catastrophic fracture in history. The dramatic contrast between their achieved height and their subsequent disappearance from our collective memory is what lends this story its profound weight. We are not looking at the slow fade of an ancient culture, but at a world interrupted at its zenith. The purpose of these silent earthworks is one of archaeology's most compelling puzzles. Why would a society invest such immense effort to reshape the land in such precise, geometric ways? The ditches and mounds themselves offer no written records, so we must interpret their function from their form, their location, and the faint echoes of cultural practice that remain. Leading theories point to several possible and likely overlapping roles. One prominent idea sees them as ceremonial centers. Their precise alignments suggest an intimate knowledge of the sky, possibly marking solstices or other celestial events important to their cosmology. These enclosures, free from everyday dwellings, could have been sacred gathering spaces for rituals, feasts, or community decisions, drawing people from across the region to reaffirm shared beliefs and social bonds. The scale alone speaks to their importance, a physical anchor for a society's spiritual life. Another theory considers a more practical need: defense. The deep ditches and raised banks surrounding many sites would have presented a significant obstacle, a clear boundary that could protect people, stored food, or valued resources. In a landscape supporting large populations, the potential for conflict over territory or wealth cannot be ignored. These structures may have been statements of strength, designed to deter rivals and safeguard communities. Yet their purpose may have been as much about identity as it was about protection. The very act of building something so visible and permanent is a powerful declaration. These earthworks could have served as symbols of social identity, markers of a particular group's territory, history, and power. Creating and maintaining them would reinforce leadership, social hierarchy, and a collective sense of belonging, turning the land itself into a monument to who they were. Finally, we must consider an ecological function. The ditches are not merely trenches, they are sophisticated landscape features. In a region defined by seasonal floods and complex hydrology, they could have served as drainage canals, managing water flow to protect settlements and gardens. They might have defined raised planting beds or created fertile zones where organic matter collected, subtly enhancing the land's productivity as part of that larger, managed ecosystem. The most compelling conclusion is that these earthworks were not built for a single reason. They were multifunctional hubs serving ceremonial, social, practical, and ecological purposes all at once. A ditch could drain water during the rains, define a sacred space during a ceremony, and mark a community's border for all to see. This very complexity is the key insight. It reflects societies sophisticated enough to embed multiple layers of meaning into their environment, societies where the spiritual, the social, and the practical were woven together into the very fabric of the earth. The true genius of these societies may not be in their monuments, but in the lines that connected them. A civilization of millions spread across a continent-sized forest could not exist as isolated islands. The Lidar maps reveal a second layer of engineering, one designed for movement and connection. Beyond the plazas and mounds, researchers are finding an intricate network of causeways, long, raised earthen roads built up above the wet forest floor. These were not wandering paths, but purposeful thoroughfares, often running straight for kilometers to link one settlement complex to another. In some regions, these causeways connect directly to the geometric earthworks, suggesting the enclosures were nodes in a larger system of travel and trade. Alongside these raised roads, the lasers have detected canals and even straightened, modified streams. What appeared to be natural waterways now show signs of human hands, widened and directed to better serve as liquid highways for canoes. This is the infrastructure of an interconnected world. A farmer could transport surplus manioc from his Terra Preta garden to a central plaza via a sunken road. A trader could paddle his canoe along a managed stream, carrying exotic stones, rare feathers, or finely made pottery from one riverine chiefdom to a mound village deep in the interior. These physical connections imply a flow of more than just goods. They would have carried news, marriage partners, technological ideas, and spiritual beliefs, weaving distant communities into a shared cultural fabric. The discovery of non-local materials provides hard evidence for this exchange. Pottery styles from one region appear far from their origin. Stone tools made from rock found only in the distant Andes turn up in lowland Amazonian sites. These objects did not walk there on their own. They moved along these networks, passed from hand to hand over hundreds of kilometers. This suggests a level of regional interaction and economic specialization previously unimagined. Some communities may have been known for their pottery, others for their skill in working particular stones, and they traded these specialties for what they needed. This transforms our view from a collection of independent villages into a vast, interactive social ecosystem. The Amazon was not a barrier, it was a connector, and its ancient people built the roads and waterways to prove it. The vibrant world revealed by the Lidar maps did not fade slowly into the mists of time. It met a sudden, devastating end. This is the great and tragic pivot in the story of the Amazon. the moment when a living civilization vanished, leaving only its silent architecture behind. The earthworks did not crumble into dust, and the fertile black earth did not lose its power. What disappeared with shocking speed were the people themselves. The catalyst was the arrival of Europeans in the Americas after 1492, an event that unleashed a cascade of catastrophe for which the Amazon's millions were utterly unprepared. The most profound and immediate agent of collapse was invisible and microscopic epidemic disease. Societies that had thrived in isolation for millennia possessed no immunological defense against the suite of pathogens that crossed the Atlantic with explorers, missionaries, and settlers. Viruses like smallpox, measles, and influenza, common childhood illnesses in Europe, became apocalyptic plagues in the New World. These diseases spread with terrifying speed along those very trade routes and waterways that had once connected communities, traveling far ahead of any European face. A village could be thriving one season and find 90% of its population gone the next, with no understanding of what had struck them. This repeated wave of sickness shattered the social fabric. The loss of elders meant the disappearance of knowledge, of stories, of the very cultural memory needed to maintain complex traditions. The loss of farmers meant the Terra Preta gardens fell into neglect. The loss of leaders meant the organized labor required to maintain earthworks and canals became impossible. The population base that supported this intricate world simply evaporated within a few generations. But disease was only one vector of the collapse. It was followed and compounded by the brutal realities of conquest, warfare, and enslavement. European colonizers, seeking wealth and labor, launched raids into the interior, capturing people to work on plantations or in mines. The violence and dislocation of these campaigns further fragmented already reeling societies. Communities that had once cooperated were now pitted against one another in the scramble for survival, or forced to flee deep into the forest, abandoning their engineered homelands. The result was a wholesale social disintegration. The networks of trade and communication broke down. The knowledge of celestial alignments for the geoglyphs, the techniques for renewing the dark earths, the very reason for maintaining the mound plazas, all this faded as survivors struggled merely to endure. The forest, which they had so carefully managed, began its relentless reclamation. Vines climbed the earthen banks, trees took root in the ditches, and within a century, the geometric patterns and raised roads were hidden beneath a seamless green canopy. What the Lidar reveals today is not the ruins of a civilization that fell from within, but the ghostly outline of a world interrupted, a thriving society erased by a historical cataclysm it could never have foreseen. The silent earthworks are not the only legacy these ancient societies left behind. While the great geometric enclosures were reclaimed by the forest, another inheritance proved far more resilient: the living knowledge of how to thrive within the Amazon. This wisdom did not vanish with the collapse of those pre-Columbian populations. Instead, it survived, carried forward through generations of indigenous communities who endured the cataclysm and maintained a deep, unbroken connection to the land. The discoveries of Lidar and archaeology are not merely uncovering a forgotten past, they are validating a living present. For many contemporary Amazonian peoples, the concepts revealed by science are not revelations at all, but echoes of ancestral practice, a continuity of understanding that has persisted for centuries. When researchers study the techniques for creating and renewing Terra Preta, they are often documenting methods still in use today. Indigenous farmers know how to enrich soils with charcoal from specific woods, compost, and organic matter, creating fertile patches that sustain their gardens year after year. This is not lost technology, it is applied daily knowledge. The managed forest gardens, those concentrations of useful trees like Brazil nut, acai, and cocoa, are not accidental. They are the result of deliberate cultivation and stewardship, a practice of selective planting and tending that shapes the forest into a productive, diverse pantry and pharmacy. This living landscape is a direct thread back to the ancient agroforestry systems that once fed millions. The very perception of the jungle as a resource to be carefully curated, rather than a wilderness to be conquered or simply passed through, represents a profound philosophical continuity. These communities understand the Amazon not as a collection of separate parts, but as an integrated whole where soil, water, plants, animals, and people exist in a relationship of reciprocal care. This worldview, which sees humans as active participants and nurturers within the ecosystem, is the true, unexcavated treasure of the Amazon. It is the cultural software that once operated the hardware of the earthworks and canals. Framing these discoveries solely as historical ruins misses their most vital dimension. They are a testament to extraordinary resilience. In the face of unimaginable loss and change, indigenous knowledge systems adapted and persisted, safeguarding the core principles of sustainability that allowed life to continue in this environment. This makes contemporary indigenous communities not just descendants of those ancient builders, but the guardians of a repository of ecological wisdom that is urgently relevant today. Their practices offer real-world models for sustainable agriculture, forest management, and climate resilience that modern science is only beginning to fully appreciate. The hidden earthworks tell us what was possible in the past, but the living knowledge held by Amazonian peoples shows us a path forward, a reminder that the greatest mysteries sometimes hold the most practical keys to our shared future. This revelation forces us to confront a modern dilemma, one with immense consequences for the future of the Amazon itself. For decades, the dominant narrative guiding conservation efforts has been the pristine wilderness model. This powerful idea argues that to save the rainforest, we must protect it from all human influence, preserving it as an untouched natural monument. On the surface, this seems noble, a defense of nature against the encroachment of industry and agriculture. But this model is built upon the very myth that the Lidar maps have now shattered, the myth of the empty primeval forest. By insisting the Amazon is a wilderness that has never known significant human habitation, this approach unintentionally erases the profound and ancient human history woven into its very soil. It creates a false dichotomy, a choice between a virgin forest and a destroyed one, with no room for the possibility that humans can be a sustainable, even regenerative, part of the ecosystem. This perspective can lead to conservation strategies that view local and indigenous communities not as partners, but as threats, potentially displacing people from lands their ancestors shaped and cared for over millennia. The discovery of the earthworks and the engineered landscape offers a radical alternative, a third path. It proves that the highest biodiversity and the most complex ecosystems in the Amazon are often found precisely in these long-term, human-shaped environments. The fertile Terra Preta patches are hotspots of life. The managed forest gardens, with their diverse concentrations of fruit and nut trees, support a wider variety of species than untouched forest in some cases. This means that human presence, when guided by deep ecological knowledge, does not inherently mean degradation. It can mean enrichment, recognizing the Amazon as a cultural landscape, a living archive of human-nature partnership, fundamentally changes the conservation conversation. It shifts the goal from creating a human-free museum to fostering a resilient, working forest. This approach champions community-based stewardship, empowering the indigenous and traditional communities who are the direct inheritors of this ancient ecological wisdom. Their practices of agroforestry, soil enrichment, and selective cultivation are not primitive. They are sophisticated adaptations proven over thousands of years. Integrating this living knowledge into modern conservation and sustainable development plans offers a more nuanced and hopeful way forward. It suggests that protecting the Amazon is not about keeping people out, but about supporting the right kind of human presence, one that understands the forest as a garden to be tended, not a warehouse to be emptied. The hidden earthworks do more than rewrite history. They provide a blueprint for the future, showing us that the greatest hope for this vital ecosystem may lie in remembering the profound partnership between people and place that once made it flourish. The story of this lost world is a testament to human ingenuity, but its rediscovery is a triumph of modern technology. This new understanding of the Amazon was not born from a single, lucky find, but from a quiet revolution in how we see the past. At the heart of this change is Lidar, a tool that has fundamentally rewritten the rules of archaeological exploration. In just over a decade, it has moved from an exotic, expensive experiment to a standard piece of the surveyor's toolkit, much like how the telescope transformed astronomy or the microscope opened the invisible world of biology. Its power lies in its perspective. For centuries, archaeologists worked at ground level, piecing together history one careful excavation at a time. It was a slow, meticulous process, like trying to understand a city by examining a single sidewalk square. Lidar lifted us above the trees, granting a god's-eye view of entire ancient landscapes. This shift in scale enabled a paradigm shift in thinking. We stopped asking, "What is this one mound?" and started asking, "How do all these mounds connect?" The technology did not just find more sites, it revealed the system they were part of, transforming isolated dots into a coherent map of a civilization. Yet Lidar is not a magic wand that explains everything. It provides the breathtaking blueprint, but to understand the lives within that blueprint, science employs a whole suite of complementary tools. On the ground, soil scientists perform precise chemistry analysis on those patches of Terra Preta, identifying the specific mix of charcoal, pottery shards, and organic matter that gives it such enduring life. This tells us not just that they farmed, but how they farmed with such sustainable brilliance. Meanwhile, drones buzz over cleared areas or forest gaps, capturing ultra-high-resolution photographs and 3D models of individual earthworks, allowing for detailed study without disturbing the site. From even higher up, satellites constantly monitor the basin, tracking deforestation that inadvertently reveals new geoglyphs, and analyzing vegetation health to spot subtle signs of ancient human activity hidden beneath the canopy. Each technique adds a layer of understanding. Lidar shows us the grand architecture of the landscape. Soil science reveals the engine of its agriculture. Drones and ground teams examine the craftsmanship of its buildings, and satellites keep watch over its vast, still hidden expanse. Together, they are building a multidimensional picture, a fusion of data that is turning the Amazon from a historical mystery into a readable text. We are no longer just guessing about the past, we are assembling it with a precision our predecessors could never have dreamed of, listening to the whispers of the earth with tools they would have seen as sorcery. Yet for all the clarity these lasers provide, they also illuminate the vast, shadowy edges of our ignorance. The maps are stunning, but they are still just islands of light in a sea of green. We must temper our excitement with a dose of scientific humility. The sobering truth is that we have only scanned a tiny fraction of the Amazon basin. Think of it like this: if the entire rainforest were a library of ancient history, we have opened perhaps 1 or 2 shelves in a single wing. The overwhelming majority of the story remains unread, its pages still bound shut by the dense canopy. What percentage of the ancient engineered landscape have we actually seen? The honest answer is we do not know, but it is almost certainly a single-digit figure. Every new flyover, every fresh Lidar survey, reveals entirely new categories of earthworks and settlement patterns we never predicted. This means the current population estimates, as radical as they seem, may still be conservative. We are looking at a sample, and the full dataset is waiting beneath millions of untouched trees. This leads to profound and thrilling open questions that keep archaeologists awake at night. The function of many earthworks remains wonderfully unclear. We can see their shapes, but not the ceremonies that filled them, not the social rules they enforced, or the precise astronomical knowledge they encoded. Were the great geometric enclosures used for seasonal gatherings that united distant villages, or were they pilgrimage sites for specific rituals? The silent ditches do not tell us. Even more elusive is the question of how these societies were organized. We see the labor, the planning, the trade networks, but we do not see the rulers or the system. Was there a council of elders in each mound village? Did charismatic leaders command the construction of the geoglyphs? Were these societies relatively egalitarian, or were there sharp hierarchies with elites living on the central plazas? The absence of monumental palaces or tombs, so common in other ancient civilizations, makes this a unique and puzzling case. We see a civilization of infrastructure, but its political heart remains hidden. And perhaps the most fundamental question of all, what sparked this remarkable cultural florescence in the first place? What were the conditions, the innovations, or the pressures that prompted societies across the basin, roughly 1,000 years ago, to begin this grand project of reshaping their world? Was it a response to climate shifts, or the discovery of the Terra Preta process that unlocked new food security? Was it growing populations that demanded more complex organization, or the development of new crops that made settled life more rewarding? We see the spectacular result, but the initial catalyst is still a mystery. These unanswered questions are not failures of the research, they are its lifeblood. They maintain the essential sense of wonder, reminding us that discovery is not about closing a book, but about realizing how many more chapters are left to find. Every new laser scan, every soil sample, is a step into that unknown, a gentle peeling back of one more leaf to see what wonders are written on the forest floor below. Such staggering numbers naturally invite scrutiny, and a responsible look at this discovery requires us to listen to the skeptics. Within the archaeological community itself, there are voices urging caution, not to dismiss the findings, but to ensure we interpret them with precision. Their critiques form a vital part of the scientific process, a necessary check on the excitement of new data. One major point of debate centers on the timeline. Lidar gives us a breathtaking spatial map, but it is less precise on chronology. When we see hundreds of earthworks across a landscape, it is tempting to imagine them all buzzing with activity at the same moment, a simultaneous peak of construction and habitation. However, radiocarbon dating tells a more nuanced story. It suggests these sites were built, used, and sometimes abandoned over a period of several centuries. This means that while the total number of structures is immense, the number actively occupied at any one given time might have been significantly lower. We may be looking at a rolling landscape of occupation, where one community's ceremonial center fell into disuse as another's rose to prominence a few valleys away. This doesn't diminish the scale of human achievement, but it complicates the simple math of multiplying sites by a standard population figure. Another caution revolves around the very definition of a society. The discovery of vast networks and large populations leads to a tantalizing question. Did the Amazon ever host true urban centers or state-level civilizations akin to the Maya or the Inca? Some researchers argue that the evidence so far points to something different, a uniquely Amazonian model of social complexity. They see not cities with dense central cores, but sprawling, interconnected networks of garden villages and ceremonial nodes. In this view, the Amazon was a constellation of communities, some quite large, linked by trade, kinship, and shared ideology, but without the centralized bureaucracy, monumental palaces, or standing armies we traditionally associate with a classical state. The power may have been more fluid, residing in charismatic leaders, clan elders, or religious specialists rather than in a permanent royal court. This isn't a lesser form of organization. It is simply another way humans have found to live together in large numbers. The debate is not about whether these societies were impressive, they clearly were, but about accurately classifying the nature of their political and social structure. Were they proto-states on the verge of urbanization, or were they a highly successful and sustainable alternative to it? These scholarly discussions do not undermine the revolution in our understanding, they enrich it. They remind us that history is rarely a simple story of bigger is better, and that the true wonder of the ancient Amazon may lie in its unique path, a path that created a flourishing world of millions without following the familiar blueprint of empire. The very technology revealing this lost world also underscores its profound fragility. While Lidar grants us a view from above, the reality on the ground is a race against the clock. The same Amazonian soil that preserved these earthworks for centuries is now under immediate threat from modern pressures that erase history in a single season. The primary danger is deforestation, the large-scale clearing of forest for cattle ranching and industrial soybean farming. When a bulldozer scrapes the land clean, it does not distinguish between a modern tree and an ancient embankment. A geometric earthwork that survived 1,000 years of jungle growth can be flattened in an afternoon, its intricate form lost before anyone even knows it was there. This is not a hypothetical loss, it is happening now, with new sites often discovered only in satellite images showing their outlines in freshly cleared fields, a final glimpse before they are gone forever. Beyond agriculture, other industries pose a grave risk. Illegal gold mining operations, particularly in regions like the Tapajos, dig vast, toxic pits that chew through the landscape, obliterating any archaeological layers and poisoning the rivers that were once ancient highways. Even legal infrastructure projects such as road construction and hydroelectric dams, while aimed at development, can cut through and inundate entire ancient landscapes without a full understanding of what lies in their path. Each of these actions destroys two irreplaceable records at once. It removes the visible architecture, the mounds and ditches, and it scatters the invisible evidence, the precious layers of Terra Preta, and the artifacts they contain that tell the story of daily life. This makes the current archaeological survey a rescue mission of the highest urgency. Scientists are not merely exploring, they are documenting a vanishing heritage, using Lidar and ground surveys to create a digital archive of these sites before they are erased. Every flight over a threatened area is an act of preservation, capturing a ghostly blueprint that may soon be the only record left. The stakes here transcend academic interest. To lose these sites is to lose the physical proof of a civilization that mastered sustainable living in the tropics, a library of ecological solutions written not in books, but in the land itself. The race to map the ancient Amazon is, in a very real sense, a race to recover wisdom before the last pages of its story are torn away. For a vivid picture of this engineered world, look no further than the Llanos de Mojos, a vast tropical savanna in northeastern Bolivia. This region, subject to dramatic seasonal flooding, might seem like one of the most challenging places on Earth to build a civilization. Yet here, ancient societies did not merely adapt to the water, they orchestrated it, transforming a floodplain into a meticulously managed agricultural powerhouse. From the air, the evidence is breathtaking. The landscape is a geometric quilt of raised fields, thousands of them. These are not small garden plots, but long, rectangular platforms of earth, built up sometimes over a meter high and stretching for hundreds of meters across the savanna. Each platform is surrounded by a network of canals. This was a brilliant hydrological solution. During the rainy season, the canals captured excess floodwater, protecting the crops on the raised beds from being drowned. In the dry season, that same stored water in the canals provided vital irrigation and a thriving habitat for fish and aquatic plants. This was integrated farming at its most sophisticated, a symbiotic system where agriculture and aquaculture supported each other. But the fields were just one part of a much larger plan. Connecting this productive landscape was an extensive web of causeways, straight raised roads that allowed people and goods to move above the waterlogged ground for kilometers, linking communities and fields. Researchers have also identified complex fish weirs, clever structures placed in waterways to manage and harvest fish, adding a crucial protein source to the diet. And dotting this managed terrain are forest islands and settlement mounds, artificial high ground where people built their homes, safe from the annual deluge. This entire system represents a profound understanding of ecology. It was not about fighting nature, but about directing its forces, creating a resilient, abundant, and sustainable environment. The scale is what truly stuns. These are not the works of a few villages, but of a coordinated society capable of large-scale, long-term planning and communal labor. The Savannas de Mojo stands as a monumental case study, a living blueprint etched into the earth, proving that the Amazon's ancient people were not just inhabitants of their world, they were its master architects. The Tapajos River Basin provides another stunning portrait of Amazonian complexity, one defined by water, walls, and extraordinary artistry. Here, along the banks of this major southern tributary, societies flourished not in isolated garden villages, but in large, fortified towns that speak of dense populations and pronounced social hierarchies. Lidar and ground surveys in this region have revealed settlements of a scale and organization that rival ancient societies anywhere in the world. The most striking features are the enormous, geometric earthworks encircling these towns. These are not the ceremonial enclosures of Acre, but clear defensive structures, deep ditches, and tall embankments that formed protective rings around community cores. Within these rings, the landscape was meticulously organized. Central plazas, vast cleared areas, served as the public heart. Radiating out were residential mounds, clusters of raised earth platforms where extended families built their homes, safe from seasonal floods. Connecting everything was a network of straight, sunken roads, creating defined avenues for movement within the town's defenses. The sheer volume of moved earth to create these fortified mound complexes signals a highly organized labor force, one that could only be mobilized by a society with clear leadership and a large, settled population base. This was not a loose collection of homesteads, it was urban planning in the heart of the rainforest. The wealth and sophistication of these Tapajos chiefdoms is perhaps most vividly expressed not in their earthworks, but in their craft. Archaeologists excavating these sites have unearthed a breathtaking tradition of pottery known as the Santarém culture. This was not simple, utilitarian ware. These ceramics are masterpieces of artistry and technical skill. Vessels were elaborately modeled into intricate forms, depicting animals, human figures, and complex geometric patterns. The surfaces were often richly decorated with fine incised lines, delicate punctuation, and applications of colored resin. The most iconic pieces are the so-called caryatid vases, which feature sculpted human figures supporting the vessel itself, each with unique facial features, hairstyles, and adornments. This level of artistry implies something crucial: craft specialization. Not every household was producing these intricate works. Instead, there were likely dedicated, skilled artisans, perhaps supported by the community or by emerging elites, who devoted their time to perfecting this symbolic and valuable craft. Such specialization is a classic marker of social complexity, indicating a society productive enough that not everyone had to farm, and stratified enough that certain goods were reserved to communicate status, power, or spiritual authority. The evidence points compellingly toward a society with significant social stratification. The very layout of the towns hints at this, with certain mounds, often larger and closer to the central plaza, likely housing families of greater importance or ritual leaders. The distribution of the finest pottery and exotic trade goods, like polished stone axes from distant sources, further suggests that wealth and access to prestige items were not evenly shared. The scale of the defensive works also implies a need to protect accumulated resources and social order from external threats or internal dissent. These were likely chiefdoms, societies where authority was concentrated in hereditary leaders or influential clans who could coordinate large projects, control trade networks along the vital river highway, and commission the magnificent art that defined their cultural identity. The Tapajos case shatters any lingering notion of a uniformly simple, egalitarian Amazon. It reveals a mosaic of political forms, from the more dispersed, ceremonial networks of the geoglyph builders to these concentrated, fortified riverine chiefdoms, each adapting the genius of landscape engineering to their own environmental and social realities. These revelations in the Amazon are not an isolated story, but a vital piece of a much larger historical puzzle. For decades, our mental map of the Americas before European contact was shockingly incomplete, dominated by a handful of famous empires while vast regions were labeled as empty or primitive. This outdated view is undergoing a seismic shift, a continent-wide reevaluation often called the 1991 Revolution, after the influential book by Charles Mann that popularized these ideas. We now understand that the entire hemisphere was a vibrant tapestry of millions of people and astonishing innovation. The soaring stone cities of the Maya, with their precise calendars and towering pyramids, were just one expression of this brilliance. The Mexica, often called the Aztecs, built their magnificent island capital of Tenochtitlan, a metropolis of canals and gardens that awed Spanish conquistadors with its scale and order. Far to the south, the Inca engineered a mountain empire connected by a vast network of roads and suspension bridges, mastering slopes and climates with terraced agriculture that fed millions. And in the heart of North America, the Mississippian cultures constructed enormous earthen mounds, like those at Cahokia, that served as the ceremonial centers for complex chiefdoms engaged in continent-spanning trade. For a long time, these were presented as the exceptional civilizations, the bright spots in a mostly dark and sparsely populated wilderness. The Amazon, in that old model, was the darkest spot of all, the ultimate empty forest. But the Lidar maps and dark earths force a profound correction. The Amazon was not a silent void between these celebrated centers. It was a parallel universe of achievement, a green civilization of equal sophistication operating on a different set of principles. Where the Andes had stone, the Amazon had soil. Where the Maya had hieroglyphs, the Amazon had landscape geometry. This reframes the entire pre-Columbian world. We are not looking at a few islands of civilization in a sea of wilderness. We are looking at a hemisphere-wide phenomenon of human flourishing, where diverse cultures from the Great Lakes to the Tierra del Fuego were reaching peaks of population and cultural complexity at the same historical moment. The engineered forests of the Amazon are the final, crucial piece of evidence that completes this picture. They prove that the ingenuity required to build great societies was not limited to environments we traditionally favor, like fertile valleys or temperate zones. It flourished everywhere humans had time, knowledge, and a deep connection to place. The Americas in 1491 were not a new world waiting to be discovered by others. They were a mosaic of old worlds, of ancient, interconnected experiments in living, and the Amazonian earthworks stand as a monumental testament to one of humanity's most sustainable and widespread success stories. These discoveries raise a profound question of ownership. Who truly holds the story of the ancient earthworks? The laser maps may be drawn by scientists, but the lines they trace are the ancestral handiwork of living peoples. This brings us to a critical and sensitive dimension of modern archaeology, the vital intersection of discovery, interpretation, and indigenous sovereignty. For centuries, the study of ancient cultures was often conducted as a one-way extraction. Researchers would arrive, document, excavate, and remove artifacts, crafting narratives about a vanished past with little to no input from the descendants of those they studied. This approach treated history as a detached academic puzzle, separate from the living communities whose heritage it was. In the context of the Amazon, such a model is not only ethically flawed, it is scientifically incomplete. The geometric enclosures and dark earth gardens are not relics of a people who disappeared without a trace. They are the heritage of contemporary indigenous nations whose ancestors engineered that landscape, and whose cultural memory and traditional practices offer irreplaceable insight into its meaning. Today, a fundamental shift is taking place. Leading research projects are moving toward a model of collaborative archaeology. This means indigenous communities are engaged not as passive subjects or sources of labor, but as essential partners and co-authors of the research. From the very beginning, before a Lidar plane ever flies or a soil sample is taken, researchers are sitting down with community elders and knowledge holders. These conversations establish protocols, set shared goals, and determine how the work will proceed in a way that respects cultural values and sovereignty. The community might guide where to survey based on oral histories of significant places. They might provide the cultural context to interpret a puzzling earthwork, explaining its potential role in ancestral stories or social structures that are not written in any academic text. This partnership recognizes that there are two ways of knowing at play. Western science brings its technological tools and methods for dating and mapping. Indigenous knowledge brings a deep, generational understanding of the land, its ecology, and the cultural logic that shaped it. Neither is superior, and together they create a far richer, more accurate, and more respectful picture of the past. This collaborative approach is about more than just better data. It is about justice and narrative control. For too long, external narratives have defined indigenous history, often framing it through a lens of tragedy or disappearance. Collaborative archaeology helps return the authority of that story to the communities themselves. It ensures that discoveries are communicated in ways that benefit them, whether through supporting land rights claims, educating younger generations about their heritage, or developing culturally sensitive heritage tourism that they manage. The goal is to move from a model of extraction to one of stewardship, where scientific research strengthens cultural resilience. When an archaeologist and a community elder stand together looking at a Lidar map, they are seeing two different yet complementary layers of truth. One sees the geometric pattern of a ditch. The other may see the footprint of a ceremonial house mentioned in a story passed down for generations. By weaving these threads together, we do not just uncover a lost civilization, we help reanimate a living lineage, honoring the past by empowering its rightful heirs in the present. This ethical framework transforms the earthworks from mere academic curiosities into active pillars of cultural identity and sovereignty, reminding us that the most important discoveries are those that heal rather than take. The evidence compels a single, transformative conclusion. We must abandon the old story of a pristine, empty wilderness. In its place, a new model for Amazonian history emerges, one that synthesizes the geometric earthworks, the fertile dark earths, the managed forest gardens, and the staggering revised population estimates into a coherent, breathtaking whole. The pre-Columbian Amazon was not a backdrop for small nomadic bands. It was a densely populated, culturally diverse, and profoundly engineered human environment. Millions of people lived here not as passive inhabitants but as active architects. They transformed thin, acidic soils into enduringly fertile gardens through the genius of Terra Preta. They shaped the forest itself into a productive mosaic of fruit trees, palms, and medicinal plants. They connected their world with causeways and canals, and they inscribed their social and spiritual visions into the very earth with vast geometric enclosures and fortified towns. This was a civilization built on a different logic, one of integration rather than domination, where human activity enhanced the ecosystem's richness and resilience. Its scale and sophistication were simply invisible to the European eyes that first arrived, and then, in a historical blink, it was gone. The collapse triggered by introduced illness and the violence of conquest was not just a social tragedy, it was a demographic and ecological catastrophe on a continental scale. The networks of trade shattered, the knowledge to maintain the earthworks faded, the gardens were reclaimed by the forest. Within a few generations, the vibrant, managed landscape that had supported millions began its return to a wilder state. This rapid transformation is the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. It explains the profound illusion that captivated explorers and scientists for centuries. The empty, primeval forest that Europeans later encountered and enshrined in myth was not a natural condition. It was the ghost of a fallen world, a garden slowly forgetting its gardeners. The true wilderness was not the forest, but the silence that followed. The true map of this ancient world is still being drawn, its outlines shifting with every new pass of the laser. So where do we go from here? The horizon of discovery stretches wide, filled with tantalizing possibilities for what we might find next. The immediate future is one of scale. As funding and technology become more accessible, Lidar surveys will expand from their current islands of data to blanket entire regions, perhaps even entire countries within the basin. This vast, systematic scanning is almost certain to reveal forms we have not yet dreamed of, perhaps earthworks of even greater size and complexity, or entirely new categories of settlement patterns that challenge our current models. One of the most thrilling quests is the search for a true urban heart. We have found large, fortified towns and sprawling ceremonial networks, but have we yet discovered a major political or economic capital, a central hub that coordinated these far-flung activities? Some researchers believe such a place, a true Amazonian metropolis, must exist, perhaps hidden beneath the confluence of major rivers or deep in a region still untouched by modern surveys. Its discovery would be a landmark moment, reshaping our view of political organization in the tropics. Beyond the architecture of earth and forest, another frontier lies in the very bones of history, the realm of ancient DNA. As techniques for extracting genetic material from tropical soils and remains improve, they offer a revolutionary new lens. This science could trace the migration routes of these populations across the basin, uncovering their genetic relationships to each other and to modern indigenous groups. It could reveal stories of resilience and adaptation written into the human genome, showing how these societies biologically responded to the challenges and opportunities of their engineered world. Most poignantly, it could help reconnect living communities with specific ancestral lineages, adding a deeply personal chapter to the archaeological map. Each of these paths' broader surveys, the hunt for central places, and the insights from genetics promises to add profound new layers to the story. The most important thing to remember is that we are at the very beginning of this new understanding. The Lidar maps are not the final picture, they are the first clear sketch. Every new scan is a turn of the page, and the library of the Amazon is immense. The promise of what remains to be found, hidden beneath the green canopy, is the greatest allure of all. This is not a history that is finished being written. The journey we have taken is one from a comforting myth to a staggering truth. For generations, the Amazon was seen as the world's last great wilderness, a timeless green cathedral untouched by human ambition. Today, we know that story was an illusion. Beneath that canopy lies the blueprint of a lost civilization, a world of millions who mastered their environment with a genius we are only beginning to comprehend. They were not mere inhabitants of the forest, they were its architects, cultivating dark earths, designing geometric landscapes, and building networks of towns that thrived for centuries. This revelation does two profound things. First, it rewrites the deep history of the Americas, proving that human flourishing was a hemisphere-wide phenomenon, with the Amazon as one of its greatest and most sustainable chapters. Second, and perhaps more urgently, it reframes the modern crisis of the rainforest itself. The Amazon is not a pristine wilderness we must keep frozen in time, but a cultural landscape with a long history of human partnership. Its greatest biodiversity is often found in these ancient, human-shaped places. This means the path to its future may not lie in keeping people out, but in learning from the very societies who once nurtured it so successfully. The hidden earthworks are more than archaeological wonders. They are a testament to human ingenuity and a stark warning about civilizational fragility. They show us what is possible when societies live in deep reciprocity with their world, and they remind us how quickly such complex worlds can vanish. To look at the Amazon now is to see a dual monument, a living forest that is both a reservoir of irreplaceable life and the resting place of a forgotten world. Our task is to protect both, to listen to the lessons written in the soil, and to ensure that this chapter of human history, so recently rediscovered, is not lost a second time.